you start seeing the way things actually are, not how you want them to be. It's really key. So much of our lives is filtered through this bifurcating mind that we have. We have these filters of thoughts and emotions that get in the way. It's the clinging to it. It's not that we have thoughts. Thoughts are not bad. They're not good, they're not bad. We cling to our thoughts. We get stuck on these thoughts, it kind of become obsessive. We're all kind of obsessives in a way. So through the Zazen meditation, your mind just get more and more settled into your body. And that's when things can really change.
Welcome to After Peter Pan, the podcast about growing up and finding your purpose. I'm your host, Pat Teneriello, and today I'm joined by Trueman Taylor. He's a Zen Priest at the Rochester Zen Center, one of the oldest Buddhist Zen centers in North America. We dive into his journey, how he went from searching for direction to fully committing to the Zen path. We break down what Zen really is, how meditation works, the benefits, and how it can help you navigate change, suffering, and find meaning. Zen meditation has been a big part of my own growth, and I hope this conversation inspires you to try it for yourself or to deepen your practice. Enjoy the episode. Many listeners probably have never heard from a Zen priest. So how did you become a Zen priest?
I'm actually originally from Canada. I grew up in Montreal, and also I went to school in Ottawa. Yeah, I just got really interested in Zen because I was just reading a lot in my early 20s, and I was like really searching. And so I was reading like Graham Greene. I was just reading a lot of novels, not so much religion, but just like novels. And then I just came across this word Zen, and I just became really intrigued by that, especially J.D. Salinger's. Did you ever read Catcher in the Rye? Anyway, no. So I got interested in Zen. So the very first book I picked up was 3 Pillars of Zen, which I know you know, which is written by the founder of the Rochester Zen Center.
That's what brought me to Zen too.
Yeah, exactly. And what's so great about that book is that, especially the last half of the book or last third of the book, it talks about these experiences that people have, these enlightenment experiences they have, especially in sesshin, these long meditation retreats that we do. So that was the carrot. I mean, when I saw that and when I read that, I'm like, I want to start practicing. And it took me a little while to, when I talk about practice, of course, it always means meditation in Zen. So and same thing with sitting. When I say sitting, it means the Zazen meditation posture that we do, which is, by the way, all described as, in 3 Pillars of Zen. Like, that's the other great thing about that book is it just like, when Roshi Kapleau wrote it in Japan, because that's where he was training. He was there for like 13 years of his life. He never thought that Zen would take off the way it did in America and in Canada. And so he was just really writing a practical guide on how to do Zazen, like how to do, the different postures that we do. It was really a how-to manual because he didn't think there'd be teachers in America, which there's a lot of teachers now. There's all different traditions now. But anyway, so I had a personal crisis in my life. I was obsessed on what I wanted to do with my life. There was pressure from my family and just the outside forces of you got to figure out what you're going to do for a living. Like, what kind of job are you going to have? So I had this personal existential crisis, and then my parents' marriage dissolved, and it was all happening at the same time. My high school sweetheart finally dumped me because it wasn't working out. And my brother was going through life crisis as well. So it was at that point where it's like, all right, I'm going to start sitting. Like, I'm going to start meditating because I have a feeling this is going to help. So that was when I had this personal crisis with my family and myself. That was when I made the commitment to start sitting, even if it was just 10 minutes a day, like just do it every day. And so I started meditating. I started to really kind of get more stabilized and centered. And in the meantime, I was going to university, I was getting some degrees, and I was just basically pretty much doing this on my own. My first 2 years of practice was actually at the Montreal Zen Center. So that was great to sit with others. And then I did 2 more years. I got a master's in library information science, and that was in London, Ontario. But I had been meditating like an hour a day every day. Pretty much. I went to my first workshop at the Rochester Zen Center, which is not far. It's literally across from Toronto on the other side of Lake Ontario. So I started going there, And I felt really a deep affinity with my teacher, Roshi Bodin. And they also have, we're kind of considered a semi-monastic training environment. People can live and work there full time. And I just decided after I finished my master's, I was just going to try that. So did my first 7-day meditation retreat. I just finished school. And I actually missed my last day of school to do this 7-day retreat. And then I was already telling Roshi, like, I really want to come for training full time, being on staff, what we call. And he said, yeah, pack your bags, come on down, and we'll see how it works out. So I went back to Canada, packed all my bags, my few things that I needed, and just moved to Rochester. And so that was in 1997. In terms of becoming a priest, I was training there. So I mentioned the Rochester Zen Center. We have this kind of training program where you can meditate, and basically you're there full time. You're living there, you're being fed, you have a room, and you just follow, you kind of sign on the dotted line, I'm going to do all of the sittings. So all the sittings and work there. So there's a schedule, it's a pretty intense schedule of meditation in the mornings and some evenings, and then work there during the day. So the people work in different departments like the kitchen. Like I'm in the kitchen right now. I'm the head cook in the kitchen. I'm feeding like 10 to 15 peoples every day that are training there. Yeah, people work in the office. It's like a temple. It's like an active, living, breathing, meditating temple that people can come and train at. And so once I got there, year after year, at a certain point, I just realized this is my life. This is what I want to do. And so at our center, you can become a priest. So you get ordained. Basically, the idea of being a priest is being a service for others and working at a Dharma center, at a Zen center, and just doing this full time. Like I don't have a job on the outside. This is my job, is being a priest. You just kind of try and live your life as simply as possible. We keep our hair short. Part of being a priest, the uniform is you're wearing black or blue. The meditation robe. So we meditate with robes. That's always optional. So there are brown robes, but as a priest, I have a blue robe. And one of the things too is you take on a new name. So the name I chose for myself was Trueman. So my original name is Christopher, but then once I got ordained, then I became Trueman, and everyone calls me Trueman. And I'll always remember that I already made this warning to my mom, who came to my ordination. It was great. So did my father. And my mom had this worried brow on her face. I'm going to have to start calling you Trueman. I'm like, no, you don't have to call me Trueman. I'm Christopher. You gave me that name. But just within the community, what we call the Sangha, Buddhist community, everyone calls me Trueman. And I'll just mention one last thing.
Please.
Becoming a priest is like, it's no small feat in the terms of like, this is a lifetime commitment. I'm going to be doing this for the rest of my life. You don't just do it for a couple of years and then just do something else. And that was a liberating thing about me and becoming ordained, is that I realized, all right, I have no choice now. This is what I'm doing. I'm committed to this. I'm committed to change. You mentioned change earlier. I'm committing to navigating all the changes in the world and the changes in myself, and just keep working on myself and being a better service to others. That's really the key thing about becoming a priest.
Personally, in my growing up story, I had a lot of difficulty with commitment. Mm-hmm. And you talk about a life commitment to something. And obviously you worked up to that, because the way you described, you finished your master's and you went and you kind of tried it out. And mm-hmm. then at some point, something, it clicked and you decided to make a life commitment. It's a lot of pressure to pick one thing and stick with it. And so a lot of people that have come on the podcast will talk about how, well, you could try something. And if it doesn't work out, then you just go and try something different, right? And so that transition from trying it to then committing to it for life, could you talk to me a little bit about the period between the first decision, which is not forever, and then maybe the second one, and how much time went by between trying it and then making that commitment? What went through your mind to flip the switch, said, I'm ready for this?
You just mentioned the mind. So, Zen is really about, it's this mind-body practice that we do, and we're meditating every day, ideally, and you're settling the mind. You're starting to first notice what's going on in the mind, which a lot of people don't know, that our mind is just constantly churning these thoughts and feelings coming up, but it's more to the thoughts. it just goes on and on and on and on. It's what, in Buddhism we call the monkey mind, right? And so once you start to notice and your mind starts to settle, once I got there, I kind of knew that this is what I really wanted to do. But I was like, it's like you say, you just try it out. But the key with Zazen is because it can be hard. The roadblocks keep coming and coming and coming. That's why I feel it's so important to meditate with a community. I mean, sit on your own, yes, but to sit with others. And, Zen is a mentor-based practice. So it's good to have like a teacher. And I always tell this every single time. This is what appealed to me so much about Zen, is that I always like telling new people, there's nothing I can give you. There's nothing Roshi or a sensei or a teacher can give you that you don't already have. It's really up to you to uncover it, to do the practice, do it every day, see what's there, and just realize it for yourself. And then the teacher's just there to like guide you, not to give you any theory, not to like tell you this is what, this is how things are, but you have to realize that for yourself. And that's why we do this through the meditation. We realize the Dharma through the meditation. And so, it's just kind of like a progressive thing. I had a certain kind of like obstacle. I said, I'm not gonna become a priest until like I'm like really, really get deep into my practice. But then after a certain point, I just realized that's ridiculous. Like, this is what I want to do. This is what I need to do. I need to become a priest. And so that's when I approached my teacher, and yeah, Roshi from the very get-go, like, was really supportive. He says, yeah, you're ready. You can get ordained. Yeah. So usually the requirement, the kind of like the guideline we always used to have was like, you have to be 5 years on staff. And then after that, you can become a priest. We've kind of moderated that now to 2 years on staff, because 2 years at a training center, meditating every day, it grounds you. And then you can, at a certain point, and we have several priests now, which is great. I used to be the only one. It was a little lonely for a while. For me, it was just me and Roshi, but we've got a lot of priests now. So,
Okay, I didn't realize that.
yeah.
Okay. And you also talked about Three Pillars of Zen, the book of the founder of the Rochester Zen Center where you are. And I remember the part of the book that really stuck out to me is similar to what you shared, is that those stories of enlightenment from regular everyday people. And I always thought this idea of enlightenment was like so far out there. It's like it's hard to believe it exists. But when I read that book, it just became so tangible and practical and possible.
Concrete.
Yeah. Yeah. So as a priest, like, what does a typical day look like for you?
I'll just describe a day. So wake up at the center is at 5:15 in the morning. So you get up, brush your teeth, get ready, and then you hit the meditation hall, what we call the Zendo. We meditate from 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. It's 1 hour round, but there's a bell at the halfway point for change of posture. And then at 7 o'clock, there's a traditional Zen chanting, which is about 10 to 15 minutes long. So that ends at 7:15. And then, so after that, there's like breakfast. It's our breakfast. 8 o'clock, we have a work meeting, and then we get to work. And so from 8 o'clock to 12:30, we work. There's a tea break in between. Then we have lunch. And some of our lunches are formal, which is we eat in silence. There's like a chanting ceremony at the beginning. We do a little bit of chanting and eat in silence. We have lunch at 12:30 and then break. And then 1:30, we resume work from 1:30 to 3:30. And then after that, we're off. But then some evenings we do have sittings from 7 to 9 o'clock, 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. And those are like Monday night. Tuesday night is a little shorter. It's 7 to 8:30. And then Thursday night, 7 to 9. And we used to sit Friday night, 7 to 9, but that's changed right now. We're not doing that right now. I hope someday we'll get back to that. So we're basically sitting, doing Zazen 6 mornings a week and 3 evenings a week. And then Monday is kind of like our day off. Our weekend's kind of like Sunday afternoon and Monday. So that's a regular daily schedule. And then, of course, as you know, we have these sessions, these meditation retreats, and we do 6 7-day sessions a year. Right now, we're doing 3 2-day sessions, these weekend retreats. And I mean, it's worth talking about sesshin a little bit. Roshi Kapleau, the author of Three Pillars of Zen, our founder, talks a lot about sesshin. So it's this really intensive. You're basically sitting, like meditating 10 hours a day. Wake ups at like 4:10 in the morning, and then we end at 9. So it's basically 4 blocks of sitting, as you know, throughout the day. There are usually the blocks of meditation are like 2 hours throughout the day, and there's a work period and break, of course, break, and there's chanting and exercise period. But yeah, we're doing a lot of meditation every day. And that really settles the mind, especially in day 5, 6, and 7. That's when things can really cook, and transformation and change really starts to occur. It can happen at the beginning of sesshin, but the longer you sit, the more change occurs, and the more you sit, the more changes occur. So that's why we do so many sesshins every year.
That part where you say you really start to cook and transformation occurs. For someone who has never sat, and that's probably a good amount of our listeners, like, could you go a little deeper into what that means? Like, what could they expect if they were to take up this practice?
Yeah, so I always tell people, when you start to do Zazen, start to meditate, we say this every single time at our introductory workshops. We have like 6 of them every year. I always say, just start modestly. If you're going to start trying, if you think this is for you and you want to try it, just do 10 minutes a day, but do it every day, 10 minutes. And then even after a couple of weeks, you just start to notice the benefits. Your mind might be a little more quiet. You might become more present. You might notice things a little better because your thoughts are starting to recede a little bit, and you're starting to get more into your body. You become more relaxed, obviously, as time goes on. I mean, that applies to every kind of meditation practice. And then you just start gradually working your way up to like 20 minutes a day, but to do it every day, because that's when the faith starts to kick in. Like, you're like, okay, I think there's something about this that's working. And, not everybody does sesshin. Not everybody has to. It's just the daily practice is really the key. But the next step for a lot of people is doing these sesshins. Usually people start with 2 days, and we used to do 4-day sesshins. We're not doing those right now, but the 7-day, that's really the powerful. You have like, 40 to 50 people sitting together, and believe it or not, that does make a difference sitting with others. And it's just kind of just talking about my own personal experience. As time goes on, the first couple of days are really rough. You're tired a lot. Your mind is really active. You're dealing with pain because these postures, really an important part of Zazen is you don't move when you're sitting, right? For these 30, 35-minute rounds. So you can't move. Now, I'm talking, obviously there's the micro adjustments here. I'm getting to Zazen posture. If I notice my head is leaning forward, then yeah, I adjust it. That's fine. You want to have a nice, relaxed, straight posture for Zazen. But none of this. You can't do this. You can't look around. That's not going to cut it in Zazen, because the body mind, you can't tease apart body and mind. They're not two, and they're one. And so if you're distracted and you're looking around, you're not going to get into a deeper state of concentration. It's really hard. Let's put it that way. So that's why we really emphasize the no moving. So as time goes on in these meditation retreats, sesshin, which means, it's a Japanese word, means unifying mind. As time goes on, you're just starting to notice more your thoughts, but you're not grasping. You become more likely to not grasp at the thoughts, and you're just getting more and more settled, and you just have more energy because you're not so caught up in your thoughts. And as time goes on, with the support of your own Zazen and others, you're just like getting deeper into and then your mind is becoming stiller. And as a result of that, you start seeing the way things actually are, not how you want them to be. It's really key. So much of our lives is filtered through this bifurcating mind that we have. We have these filters of thoughts and emotions that get in the way. It's the clinging to it. It's not that we have thoughts. Thoughts are not bad. They're not good. They're not bad. The part that is kind of bad is that we cling to our thoughts. We get stuck on these thoughts. It can kind of become obsessive. We're all kind of obsessives in a way, clinging to our thoughts. So through the Zazen meditation, as time goes on, your mind just get more and more settled into your body. and less caught up here. And that's when things can really change.
That's really helpful. Thanks for describing that.
One last thing, Pat, interrupt.
Please.
So it's not just about the meditation being on the mat, oh, and by the way, as you know, we face a wall. Some schools, they sit facing out, facing each other, but in our school, we sit facing a wall, and it's just to cut down on distractions. But the big thing about Zazen is that you bring this out into your daily life. It's not just about gazing at your navel through the meditation, which we're not doing that, but it's to bring it out into your daily life. And the more you do Zazen on a regular basis, the easier it gets to just be present. So whatever you're doing, we always tell people, like, if you're just sweeping the floor, you just sweep the floor. You notice, but you're just sweeping the floor, not thinking about what you have to do next or about the fucked up political situation a lot of us are in. None of that. You notice it, but you just get back to sweeping the floor or scrubbing a plot or typing on a computer. You're just doing that and not, being separated by thinking about other things. You're just doing whatever you're doing. And the more you do Zazen on a regular basis, the easier that gets. But it's really hard. It's really hard to do this like moving Zazen. But we just keep trying. We just keep doing. And that's what goes back to commitment. It's like committing yourself to doing this practice every day because in the long run, it's going to benefit you in so many ways. And just despite the obstacles, and like there are still sometimes when I'm practicing, I feel impatient and I'm wondering if the round's going to end. And that's a sign that, okay, I'm not really into my practice. And so just getting back to that, it's always returning.
That consistency is so important. That's something, if I'm honest with myself, I struggle with that. So I'll go through bursts where I'll have months or weeks where I'm really consistent. Then something will throw me off, sickness, illness, family, whatever, work. And then once I'm thrown off, it takes me weeks to get back into it. And those are weeks that I've lost. And so, everyday life, it just gets in the way. How do you keep that consistency?
Okay, so I struggle with that once in a while, especially on vacation and this sabbatical that I'm almost done with, but I was on. I sometimes you just can't. You like miss a day because you got to get up early and go travel. But what I found really helpful, John Sensei mentioned this a long time ago, and it really stuck with me. So if there's a day that I can't sit, I don't have time. All right, I'm going to sit 5 minutes. That's it. 5-10 minutes. That's it. And you know what? Just doing that kind of really, I never regret doing that. This practice can be really challenging. It's not meant for everyone. And there are a lot of other different meditation traditions that are totally legit. I just wish everyone had some kind of meditation practice because it really can make a change, a really positive change in one's life. So it doesn't have to be Zen. It could be something else. But Zen is what I know. This is my path. And so even just doing 5-10 minutes a day makes a difference and it can really help. And it's just, it's that consistency. Now, my experience with that, because I struggle with that early on, I'd take like a week off, or as time goes on, if you're practicing every day, it gets a little easier to close that gap when you're not sitting. So like, for instance, if you're not sitting for like 3 or 4 weeks, you get back on the mat. As time goes on, if you keep sitting, then you're closing that gap until you reach a point where, all right, I have to do this every day. I need to do this every day. Mm-hmm. The hard part, I noticed this for myself, the first couple of years, like if I stopped sitting for like a week or two, I didn't really notice the change. I didn't really notice that I wasn't sitting, but it was only when I got back on the mat, that was when, oh my God, I can't believe I stopped sitting, because even that, just having a, settling the mind that first round after not sitting for a couple of days, I kind of really notice,
How important is the time, the consistency of when you sit on the mat and practice?
It works differently for different people. Like I'm very much a morning person. That's how my body, mind, like I'm an early morning person. And so I love to sit first thing in the morning, brush my teeth and I go hit the mat, which is not always possible. But, I just found out, one of the teachers at her center, Dara Sensei, she was an academic for a very long time. And she kind of got out of that racket and she was kind of tired of it. And I found out just recently that the time that she sat was not in the mornings. It was like She'd get home from school. She was teaching at a university. She'd get back home and she would sit for like 30 or 45 minutes before dinner and then have dinner. So that was her daily practice. So the traditional times are in the mornings and the evenings. And some people, sit in the mornings, others sit at night. They prefer to do that. Whenever you can fit it in your schedule. I know some people that would sit during their lunch break.
And you mentioned Zen has been your path, but there are many paths that one can choose, and Zen isn't for everyone. I know you probably haven't looked into every form of meditation, but if someone were to ask you, what's the difference between Zen and other forms of meditation, how do you typically answer that?
Yeah, Zen is really about this one pointed practice of concentration of the mind. So I'll just give you an example. When we start off, we always put a person on counting the inhalations and exhalations from 1 to 10. So you breathe in 1 and you breathe out 2. Obviously, you're not vocalizing it. You're, in your mind, but it allows you the counting of the inhalations and exhalations are great because it allows you to hold on to something, to really focus on the counting. You just put all of your attention on the counting from 1 to 10. And that allows you to start noticing what's going on in the mind. You start seeing the thoughts and you get lost in your thoughts, you get pulled away, up, bring it back to 1, So it's a concentration practice. And then there are other practices after that. The only practice I can really speak of, because I've read a little bit about, is the mindfulness practice, which is more, my understanding of it is more like you're labeling your thoughts. You're noticing your thoughts and you're labeling your thoughts. That's all I can really speak of. Zen is the only practice I've ever really done. So, but all these practices, I don't want to say they all lead to, like all religions, Buddhism has all these various schools, but they're all leading to the same, there's that saying, you live in Rome, all paths lead to Rome, it's kind of like that in Buddhism too. We're all kind of heading in the same direction.
And the end point of those directions, we mentioned the word enlightenment.
Right.
Someone who doesn't have an idea of what that is, like how do you describe enlightenment?
Can't be described. It can only be experienced. We use different words for our true nature. There's Buddha mind, true nature, or one mind. But basically, enlightenment can only be described really as it's just seeing the non-dual nature of reality. So right now, the way most of us perceive the world is that I'm here, you're there. There's this so-called outside world where really everything is there is no separation. There's just this, So there's just this present moment, and there's nothing other than that. There's no past, there's no future, there's just this present moment. And this can be a very gradual understanding that one can have through the meditation. As you practice year after year after year, you start to become less separated because you're not so caught up in your thoughts. You're not separating yourself with your thoughts. And so this enlightenment, which often occurs in sesshin because we're meditating so much and you're seeing a teacher and you're just constantly bringing your attention back. It's just this deep, deep concentration. You reach a point where your mind just becomes so still. And then through that stillness, there can be this, what we call an awakening experience, which is this non-dual nature of reality. Everything is empty. We often talk about emptiness. You're seeing into the emptiness of all things and phenomenon, just everything. At the beginning of our talk, you talked about change. There is nothing but change in this world. In Buddhism, we call it impermanence. So it's seeing into that impermanence. See, I've already spoken too much about it because it can't be described. It can only really be experienced. And that's where the faith comes in. It's something, that's what, going back to 3 Pillars of Zen, just read about those enlightenment experiences. It gives you a taste of the possibility of having that through meditation. But it's got to happen. For us, it's through the meditation. That's the important thing.
So when I first was introduced to Zen, I read a few books. So I was like theorizing. My last book was Three Pillars, but before Three Pillars, I had read Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. I had read a few other well-known Zen books, and that way I could talk about it. And it's like, this is really cool. But I hadn't sat on the mat. I hadn't sat. So one takeaway is when I started sitting, everything changed. It was no longer about reading and learning about it, just doing it. And so the reason I'm bringing this up is that some people may be born and raised a certain religion. Like I was born and raised Catholic. So they might think, well, Buddhism, that's another religion. Like I can't be a part of that. It's not my religion. So would you agree that it's really a practice?
It is. So a couple of things about that. I had the exact same experience you had about, I read Three Pillars of Zen and a couple of other books. I read a lot of books by this scholar called D.T. Suzuki. It's a very intellectual process Zen. But yeah, I was talking an awful lot about it, but it wasn't until I started doing the practice that things really changed. Nothing will change from reading books, really, in terms of Zen. Like it's doing the practice. So yeah, I had that same exact experience. Zen is not a belief, it's a practice. So I don't care about belief. You can be Catholic, you can be Jewish, you can be an atheist. We have some people who are atheists that come. Your background doesn't matter. Zen is not about dogma. It's not about proselytizing. Yes, we have these workshops. Meditation is great, but come to the workshop if you think Zen is for you. It's like I said, it's not for everyone. I grew up a little bit Catholic, especially in Quebec, French, Roman Catholic culture. And there's a certain amount, to the degree of, if your family's Catholic, there's a lot of conditioning. We're all conditioned certain ways, whether it's being a Catholic or Jewish or just society in general, just all the inputs and feedback we get from society. And Zen is really about just cutting through all of that and seeing what's really real. What is reality? That's the thing that appealed to me again about Zen, is like, what really is real? What is the ultimate truth or ultimate reality? And Zen is a way to get to access that, to become that, to see into that. The only way I'll describe Zen as a religion is you have to have faith. You have to have faith that this practice works and to do it. That's it. Of course, we have the Buddhist party line is like rebirth, there's karma. We don't ask any people to believe in that, to just do the practice. And then as time goes on, you start to see the changes, you start seeing impermanence, you start seeing your own suffering, the experience, some painful things that you've held on to for a long time because you're looking into the mind. And then there's three characteristics of Buddhism in general. One is suffering, life is suffering, impermanence, that's the second one. And the third one is no self, which is kind of the hardest thing to understand, really. But it's through the Zazen, doing it every day, that these three kind of characteristics of Buddhism become more common sense. But yeah, again, Zen is not about belief. We do have on Sundays, we always start with Zazen, and then a teacher will give a teisho, which is like a talk on a topic of Zen. So, it is kind of, we have a temple. So it is a religion, but we really don't emphasize that. We always say, just do the practice consistently, just see what happens.
There was a time in my life where I was going through a lot of transformation, and I was trying to get my house in order. I was trying to lose certain habits I knew were holding me back and were unhealthy and so on. But I also was trying to figure out what to aim at, what was my purpose. And I didn't have an answer to that. So I was just kind of focused on becoming the best version of myself. And for a while, what that was looking like was I was aiming at enlightenment in the sense of this conversation. Not that I was ready to become a Zen priest, but in the sense that I was committed to sitting. And by doing that, it meant going to bed at a reasonable hour. It meant not drinking alcohol because I know I'd feel terrible the next morning. It meant not overeating because then I couldn't follow my breath properly. And so it was a commitment to sitting, which had all these ancillary health benefits and habits that I was trying to align myself to have a healthy life. And I don't know if that's something that gets discussed a lot in Zen, but I just find there's a lot of ancillary benefits from making that commitment that have nothing to do with quieting the mind, but just all those other things.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, so I always love the story that I heard from he's a senior member. He's in his 80s now, Dwayne Wilder. practicing a long time, for at least 50 years. And he loved smoking the pipe. He loved that pipe. And, he's practicing, but he kind of knew he wanted to give it up for obvious health reasons. And I always remember this, he was smoking one time his pipe and he says, you know what? I'm not going to give this up right now, but I'm going to lose it at some point. And that always stuck with me because, sometimes we're not necessarily ready to give certain things up, but through just the natural, organic process of meditating every day, it just becomes a little easier. And then finally, at a certain point, and he describes this as a moment of grace, just dropped. He just stopped. It doesn't work like that for everyone. Like I knew a Zen teacher, a very renowned Zen teacher, who smoked his entire life. He couldn't give up cigarette smoking. And unfortunately, he died pretty young. He died he's around our age or my age, 55, emphysema. So that was unfortunate. So I guess what I'm trying to say about that is it's not an all or nothing thing. You talked about Zen being a major foundation in your life. Everything comes out of Zazen. So as time goes on, and it just requires just not being hard on yourself, just being patient. I mean, I still drink once in a while. I'll have a beer. I mean, I was like a heavy drinker when I lived in Montreal in my early 20s before I practiced.
It's a party city.
And I just caused all kind of harmful actions and behavior, and I just kind of really, you're not in your mind when you're drunk. So I'll have a beer. That's about it. If I have 2 beers, then I really start noticing it starts dulling the mind, and so I just stick with 1 beer once in a while.
You talked about suffering earlier. To me, that suffering, understanding that life is suffering, helps with accepting that. Like no matter what decisions, no matter how rich or poor I am, successful or unsuccessful, like I'm going to suffer. And so for me, that was a really powerful concept. When I talk about suffering with people, some people think it's like, oh, it's really negative, man. Like, stop talking about that.
Yeah, I mean, I had that same experience too. I always go back to the Four Noble Truths. When the Buddha had his great supreme enlightenment awakening, one of his first discourses in a park in India, northern India, he proclaimed the Four Noble Truths. So the first noble truth is life is suffering or unsatisfactory. That's another way of putting it. And then the second noble truth is that it's through our egoistic, through our ego, it's this separation of self and other. It's through our ego attachments that we suffer. It's because of that, because of our attachments, clinging to things, So that's the second noble truth. But then the third one is there's a way out. So there's a way out of this suffering. So that's the key. That's the non-negative part of it, is that there's a way out. And then the fourth noble truth, he describes the Eightfold Path, basically. But in Zen, we just put this Eightfold Path, which I won't even list them. People can find them online. But basically, in Zen, it's all through the Zen meditation. That's how we liberate ourselves and liberate others. That's the key, is we're not just doing this for our own liberation. We're doing it to liberate others as well. So just like a small example, because I brought up drinking and how I cause suffering to not only to myself, but to others, is by ceasing in that kind of damaging habit of just drinking and just being wild. Like, just stop doing that. I'm causing less harm to myself and less harm to others. That's how I always like to describe, there's these 10 precepts, and I won't list them, but I always like to describe, people kind of confuse the 10 precepts with the 10 commandments, except the 10 commandments is handed down by God, which we don't believe in. We don't believe in a God, if we talk in terms of beliefs. But, the 10 precepts basically describes an enlightened life and I always like to mention, don't look at it from a moral perspective. Look at it as, how do I cause the least amount of harm to myself and to others, living this enlightened life. And so there's these 10 precepts. I'll just give an example. I resolve not to kill, but to cherish all life. That's the first one. So we follow these precepts as best we can by doing the meditation every day, knowing that we're going to screw up. but not beating ourselves up on it. I'm like, all right, I can do better, and just keep working on refining the mind, the body mind. And as time goes on, we do cause less harm to others and ourselves.
You talked about how this idea of separation, I think you use another word, but the idea that I look at you, Trueman, and I see a separate being. And that's how we kind of see the world. It's like there's the world in front of me and then there's me, and I'm separate from that. And you talked about how that's a delusion. That's not the way it is, but that's the common perception of it. Can you give any other examples of common misperceptions or the common ways that we see the world that is just not how it is?
We always like to describe like the absolute and the relative. So when I look at this mug, it's kind of a little too big. Let's use this pen. So yeah, this is a pen, but in terms of Zen practice, there's the labeling of that is a pen. But Zen is really, with the practice, really getting beyond that and seeing things as they are. No labels, and just this one pointed focus on looking at the pen. And it's like that with everything. The more you practice, the more you just start seeing things as they are, and not like labeling them, not thinking that's good, not that's bad. John Sensei has a story he loves telling, which is, this is just as he's starting to get in Zen practice when in the late 60s. And he was with a friend in Vermont, I think, and they were coming across this, like all this fungus mushroom at the base of a tree. And John's instant reaction at the time is like, that's disgusting. And his friend said, well, no, actually, it's your mind that thinks it's disgusting. And that kind of really turned things for him. It's that, again, going back to that judgment filter of like good and bad, right and wrong. We get that those are all dualistic notions. Zen is really about getting beyond notions and beliefs, good and bad. And again, this pencil, just seeing it as it is, whole and complete, just this, and yet at the same time, it's all one, but the all oneness is just that experience of just getting beyond all thoughts, concepts, feelings, everything, just cutting through that and just seeing the non-dual nature of reality. I wrote down a couple other things about the misconceptions in Zen Buddhism. One is like, it's not a philosophy. In a way, you can say it's not a religion. It's because we don't hold on to any particular beliefs. It is a practice. And maybe the last thing I'll say is that, there's a lot of commercialization of Zen. You see that word posted everywhere. That's not Zen. That's just commercial to make it sound cool and groovy. And the idea that Zen is just kind of like this chill state of mind, that's not it at all. I mean, you do become more relaxed. Any meditation you do, of course, you become more relaxed. Your blood pressure can go down, but it's so much more than that.
When I'm sitting on the mat and my thoughts arise, right? One thing I listened to recently, a podcast, and they were talking about how emotions arise. And I have witnessed that in other, when I've been sitting with other people, that emotions can arise. You can hear someone crying, for example, that's occurred. So if someone is naturally an anxiety prone and they're sitting, then the emotion that would arise would be anxiety. Is that correct to think that like these emotions come and go, or do you think about it more as thoughts?
Yeah, emotion is slightly different in the sense that it's more in the body, down here in the body, So the key to all of this is to not cling. So let's use anxiety as an example. So you're meditating and all of a sudden you get anxious. So the key to in Zen practice, you're not trying to analyze, figure out why am I anxious. Just experience the anxiety. Just get back to, say, counting the breath, because anxiety comes up a lot for people when they start. So that's why counting the breath is such a great tool. You just get back to one. Don't have to figure out why you're anxious. And as time goes on, if you do this over and over and over again, that anxiety that you experience, that you can experience year round, it gets shorter and shorter and shorter. And it comes back up. It still comes up, I'm sure, with my teacher or really senior students, myself, it still comes up once in a while. But the key is, it's always like you notice you're feeling anxious, you just get back to the practice. Just always like bringing it back to centering. And that anxiety will pass. And a lot of times I know why I'm feeling anxious. But a lot of times I don't. That doesn't matter. It's not about the analyzing of it. It's just returning to the practice. It's all about, that's what we describe as non-attachment, that not clinging to your thoughts, not attaching to your thoughts. The same thing with your feelings, not attaching. Because when you attach yourself to your feelings, you're not letting go. It just keeps it. It's still prevalent. I mean, it will pass eventually, obviously, but yeah, the sooner you get back to concentrating the mind, the quicker it will go. That's another misconception actually about Zen, is that we don't become robots through practice. No, we still feel, but I always like this image of, let's use anger as an example. After, years and years of practice, anger just becomes more like a snowflake hitting a hot pavement and melting. You experience the anger, you're angry. Hopefully you don't lash out to the person or to yourself. You just experience the anger. It's in the body, you experience it, and then you move on. It's letting go. Where a lot of people, what they end up doing, they get angry and they hold on to that anger, and that can go on for days and days and years, centuries.
Yeah, and right. And likewise, we tend to want to cling to the good, like you talked about earlier in the conversation,
Yeah,
like joy,
yeah.
happiness, and try and push away those bad things. So someone who's practiced for a very long time, like you, so it's these emotions, they're not labeled good or bad. They come in, they get experienced, and then they pass. Is that correct?
That's absolutely right. I really struggled with my emotions because I repressed everything before I came to practice. I thought didn't have a problem with anger. That's not true. I just suppressed all of my anger, and it really came out in really nasty ways, passive aggressive and so forth. So sashins, these meditation retreats, I always like to describe like our emotions in sashin can be like this, like this really wild curve. But as time goes on, and then as time goes on, and then it's not that you're not feeling anything. The emotions arise, but they're just like a blip, and you just keep getting deeper and deeper. Same thing with thoughts, stilling the mind. It's the same thing.
Some people listening to that might like so when you say that, I think of someone who's content. I think of contentment. But someone
Mm.
might say that sounds really boring.
It's not that you're not feeling anything, but you're just feeling it, and you just move on. You're not holding on to it. Again, it's this impermanence. Things happen. Like eventually, my partner is going to die, or I'm going to die because I'm in a relationship. I mean, I'm going to experience pain. That's just part of being human. But Zen practice, can you just experience that pain, and you're just with it. You're not suppressing it, but you're not clinging to it. Those are the two extremes, is trying to suppress everything and then cling to things. I always like to use those two extremes. And so, yeah, there's countless stories and stories like this really advanced student of this great Zen master, Hakuin. It was a grandmother, and she was crying. She was a very senior student. She was crying because she just lost her granddaughter. And then someone in the village came by and says, "You should be ashamed of yourself. You've practiced all these years, and yet you're crying." And she just snapped back at her. She says, "You fool. Of course I'm going to cry. Why wouldn't I cry? Because I just lost my granddaughter. It's so painful." I guess that person had an idea that Zen practitioners, they don't feel anything. It's just kind of like this flat line. You don't get dislodged so much by your feelings and emotions and your thoughts. You don't get sidetracked so much
Okay.
by them. And so again, it's going back to this present moment about, through the meditation, when you're just feeling sad, when you're just experiencing sadness, you're just feeling that. You're not trying to suppress it. You're not clinging to it. Or pain. Ah, that hurt. That's it. No, get away from that hurt. You just experience that pain. And you're not like trying to suppress the pain. You're just being with it.
In a previous conversation we've had, you've talked about there were like sufferings, like universal sufferings that we all have, and one was anger, I think greed,
Oh,
and there were
greed, anger, and
others.
delusion. Yeah, those are the three bad ones. Greed, anger, and delusion that we're all susceptible to. We all have our different versions of greed, anger, and delusion. And so, yeah, the Zazen is this process of uprooting greed, anger, and delusion.
And where does ego fit in that?
Ego is like greed, anger, delusion. Ego can be a little deceptive as a word because there's also people might associate it with self-esteem. Of course, when you're growing up, you need to have a sense of self as a teenager, especially growing up. But then when you become a full adult, then you got to drop all that. Remember, we talked about these four noble truths. As ego is basically the craving, the grasping on. That's the best way to describe it. It's just the clinging.
Okay.
So it manifests itself through greed, anger, and delusion.
I can relate
And
to,
delusion is, of course, this separation of self and other, thinking that we're alone apart from this world. When we're not, we are the world. This is it right here.
I can relate to what you said about anger and how you thought you weren't an angry person, just that you were burying that anger. There have been situations where I didn't get angry, but then I stewed on it for months, and that it's kept processing in my head. And
Right.
it's not that I ever like raged, but then I'm like, well, that must be anger that's just going through my head. Like I just can't process it because I'm burying it.
Yeah, sure. And I reached a point in my practice where this anger was, it was just a natural progression of I was starting to cling less to my thoughts, and then the anger was just coming up. And a lot of things through Zen is all about opening up the mind and seeing what's there. And so a lot of painful experiences from my childhood, say, started coming up. And yeah, I was always conditioned not to be angry, to be this good Canadian boy, and be polite. And sure, politeness is great, but the suppression of the anger is, we're all human. We all experience anger. And, again, it's going back to not suppressing it and not clinging to it. And so I was really suppressing that anger. So, one way that can help, I don't want to get into too much because it's not Zen, but I did like 3 years of pretty intense therapy, and that really helped me. It's this kind of therapy that basically breaks down your defense mechanisms to experience all this anger and rage that I held on to. And it was like in the body. It was a very physical. This is not like analytical talk therapy, which I'm sure can be helpful for some people. For me, the big thing was anger. And so by finally experiencing all this rage and anger that I held, because we do hold things in the body, it always comes back again to like this mind and body are not separate. So by holding on to that, and finally through this intensive therapy, I was able to kind of, experiencing it and then move on. And then as a result of that, the thing that surprised me the most is that I forgave my parents for the parents that I didn't have, that I wanted them to be, and Zen practice was it's that foundation allowed me to persevere through the really hard work of therapy. And it helped my Zen practice too. I allow me to let go more quicker. So it kind of really loosened up these psychic knots in a way. So that really helped.
Thanks for sharing that. Was there reluctance from your family when you made that decision to become a Zen priest? How was it received from your family?
By then they were fine with it, but the time that they really freaked out is when I made the decision to move to Rochester and move on staff. Like I did 8 years of university, and then the next thing you know, I'm like, I'm not getting a job. I'm going to the Zen Center. I'm not making any money. Like living at the Zen Center, you have a roof over your head, you're fed every day, but you get a small stipend. I think it's like maybe $200 a month now. I mean, I get paid more because I've been there for so long, but you don't make a lot of money. So my parents and my brother, they just could not understand why I was doing this. But, as time went on, when they saw the changes in me and that I was happy and this is what I needed to do. So by the time I got ordained, which was like, I got there in 97 and I got ordained in 2008. So that was 11 years later. I mean, they all came. My dad's really proud of me for getting ordained. And I mean, he's not a practitioner or anything, but yeah, they were just both really happy for me.
The other thing I've experienced while sitting, Trueman, is I get a lot of creative thoughts come through my head. Like it's like almost like a download from like some place. And sometimes they're really great creative thoughts and ideas, and I don't know where they came from, and I want to like write them down and remember them. And I know I shouldn't cling to thought, because that's the whole purpose of sitting, is to pass through you and let it go. But at the same time, I feel like it could be a really powerful tool for creativity. Have you experienced something similar? And what do you think of that?
Well, you know what I would recommend, and a lot of people do this, or some people do this, like just have a note, pad of paper and a pencil and just write it down quickly and go back to your Zazen.
Okay. Okay.
That way you can drop it. You know, you have this insight, write it down, get back to the sitting so that you can drop it. That inevitably happens. You just, as you're emptying the mind, you have insight. Where does it come from? It kind of reminds me, you know, I kind of got back into Bob Dylan recently because of that movie that came out. Yeah, so I was watching an interview with Bob Dylan. You know, he just was incredibly creative. He's written so many incredible songs. And, you know, the interviewer asked him, where does it come from? And he's like, I don't know. You know, that can't be answered. But I mean, Zazen or meditation, you know, David Lynch, he's one of my favorite filmmakers. I love his movies, and he practiced transcendental meditation. And in one particular movie, he was really grasping. He just didn't know how to get it all together. And through his through his meditating one time, it just all came in, and he just knew how to do that film. It was a Mulholland Drive. So yeah, I mean, creative people, meditation is great for creative people.
Mm-hmm.
Painters, in a way, are meditators, or poets. What poets are doing is they're observing the so-called outside world. They're observing, they're silencing their minds, paying attention. Same thing with painting. And painting is a kind of practice, really. Yeah, you have to concentrate. A lot of painters, that's how they describe. My mom's a painter. She's retired, and that's what she does. She paints, and she gets in, you know, what she calls the zone, you know, where she's just not thinking, and time just flies by.
You would liken that being in the zone to some form of meditation, like even runners might experience that, or someone who just has a hobby or sport that they get into that place, and it's like they lose their sense of self, essentially.
Right. Yeah. It's a very famous story. I kind of grew up on him, this guy, Boris Becker. Roshi, my teacher, often would talk about this because he loves tennis and watching tennis. And there's this very famous game that Boris Becker played. He's this German player, and he was just playing, like, it was talk about non-separation. You know, he was just playing. He could not miss a shot for like a long period of time. And so obviously, inevitably, the journalist asking him that question, you know, it says like, you know, those 2 or 3, 4 sets or whatever, how long it is. I don't know tennis that well. He says, but you just like, you were unstoppable. You were not missing a shot. Like, what were you thinking? And Boris Becker replied, I wasn't thinking at all. No, I don't think he had a meditation practice, but he was aware enough to know that he didn't have a thought in the mind. He was just completely one with the playing.
I don't know where I heard this or read this. It might have been in one of the discussions we've during sesshin, but the idea that wisdom comes from sitting. How do you think about wisdom? Where do you think wisdom comes from?
It's through the meditation. Once you settle the mind, you just start seeing the way things really are, and you don't get so caught up into grasping everything. That's the wisdom. It's just this non-separation. So even when you're in a conflict with someone, I used to avoid conflicts. I used to just avoid them, period. I can't even talk about them sometimes, you know. But through the practice, when you're having if you're having friction, it's not that the friction's not there, but you can sit with it. You can be with it and not push it away. I don't know if that answers your question, but the wisdom just comes from the years of practice and emptying the mind. You know, reading is great, but the Zen is not about knowledge. It's not about accumulating knowledge. It's not that at all. It's about emptying the mind and just seeing the world as it is. Not how we want it to be, just how the world is. Now, am I a reader? Yeah, I read books, especially during the sabbatical. I'm trying to read a lot more books on Buddhism and Zen just to kind of get that doctrinal aspect more firm in my body. People think that Zen is an anti-intellectual thing, but it's not. I mean, the intellect is a great tool. We need to think, we need to plan, we need to figure things out. but just so much of our time is spent just on these useless thoughts, dreaming about this or that, or about the future, or holding on to the past. All of that is just not, it's not productive. And so that I keep bringing up emptying the mind. So by stilling the mind, emptying the mind, that's where true wisdom will arise. And it's not an all or nothing thing. It just, as time goes on, you just become more and more empty. I was going to say wise, but more and more empty. And you, yeah, you just accept things more.
Someone like you who lives the life that you do, the way we've had this conversation, you've described it, and you see the world today, you see, I think about technology and this addiction to our phones, for example. Like, technology is a phenomenal tool. It's a powerful tool, and it's transformed the world in a lot of positive ways, but at the same time, it's really this concept of presence. It's really pulled us away from being present. And I struggle with my phone a lot, especially now that I have a young son, and he kind of pulls me back into the present in a very vocal way when I'm on my phone, and that's been a lesson in itself. How do you see the world today, and the contrast that with the type of life you've chosen to live? Like, what do you see there? Does it worry you?
I have a phone, a cell phone, but if I have this phone while I'm sitting on the toilet, that's not a good idea. This is how I'll explain it. Like, it's the multitasking in our lives. And so I guess in a way, looking on your phone, if you're doing something else, or you think about, that's this, get away from the multitasking. So it's the same thing with, if you're reading, you just read. If you're looking on your phone, you're just looking on your phone to see what you need, but that's it. Yeah, a lot of people struggle with the phone. I struggle with the phone sometimes. Like, this is a great thought generator. For sure. So if I'm like on my computer, say, or I'm watching television, I love movies. So when I'm watching a movie, I'll make sure my phone's not around anywhere. Like, it's in my pocket, so I can focus on the film. The whole thing about tweeting and watching a movie, it's just because you're splitting your attention. So it's that getting away from the multitasking. Just like whatever you're doing, you just do that. If you're at a concert, just listen to the music. Just be one with it.
One thing I've also noticed when I've done extensive sitting, like coming home from a session, I come home and I feel so playful, and everything is like funny. Like, I just find my sense of humor. I'm lighter. I'm laughing at things that I wouldn't normally laugh at. My corners of my mouth just kind of naturally do this. And I used to smoke pot, and so and that was one of the reasons I like smoking pot, was I just found everything was funny. And so I find that it's kind of like that. So when I come back from an extensive sitting and getting on my hands and knees and playing with my son and like seeing the world like in this playful way, where do you think that comes from? Like, why is that extensive sitting can cause that sort of thing?
You're less caught up in your thoughts. You're just, again, it's seeing things as they are. I mean, I know exactly what you're talking about. The last Dharma talk I was giving, this was on a Sunday. I gave a Dharma talk about practice. And at a certain point, I was at this desk working on it, and then I was struggling with it a little bit. All right, I need a break. So I just got up, not thinking about it. I just got up and I went to play with my cat. Love playing with my cat. So I was just playing with her for a little bit. That was like a great break. I was like one with that experience. It can be so much easier with your kids, I'm sure. Animals, like just playing with them, being one with them. And then I wasn't thinking about my talk at all, but I just kind of gave me that space. And then, all right, I get back to it. And then it just wasn't a problem anymore. That's the promise of practice. I always remember the story too. I was always struck by this. This girlfriend that I was dating for a while, I just started practicing, and we were at this cabin, and I was so kind of sure that the cabin was in that direction, and it wasn't. And I said, no, it's this way. And I led us astray. It was getting dark. She finally got me out of it and says, it's this way. We finally got to the cabin. All right. So weeks later, she was relaying the story to someone, like kind of making fun of the situation. And my previous self, here's this no self coming in. My previous self, had I not been meditated, when she recounted that, had I not practiced, I would have been really pissed. because it's kind of like, no, I just would have been upset because she was kind of making fun of me. But I wasn't. I was just laughing with her because it was ridiculous. I was insisting that I was this way and it wasn't. So that's the ego really coming in. It's like, it's in this way. And then finally she says, no, 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 it's this way. And I finally relented. It was that experience of laughing at my own foolishness, my own insistence that, no, it's this way. It's got to be this way. And it wasn't. But it was the laughing at that again, it was that, all right, there's something to this practice. Like, I'm not taking myself so seriously. Yeah, that definitely happens after sesshin. After sesshin, it's like, yeah, you're on a cloud nine really for a couple of days. You're just much more open and everything just is bright and luminous. And you're just kind of, yeah, you're more one with everything.
Purpose. I was wondering if we could try and tie the practice to finding a sense of meaning and purpose. Do you have an opinion on that? And or have you seen people at the center that have tried to tie their practice to finding a sense of meaning in life?
I know some people, they have a certain kind of job. They don't like their job or career. And so I've known quite a few people, like, they're dissatisfied with the kind of work that they're doing. But through their Zazen, slowly but surely, they come to a realization, I got to stop doing this. And they'll go back to school and become a nurse. This is what I really want to do. Or it's just the Zazen itself. I mean, I guess another way of describing it, when I first got into Zen, I was kind of really obsessed with the meaning of life. But that's just a totally intellectual thing. What is the meaning of life? There is no meaning in life. It's being present, just this present moment. And clarifying the mind. That's the purpose, is to just this single-minded attention in the present moment and just being whoever you're with, you're just being with that person and not separating yourself, thinking about other things or fretting or worrying. And that's it. It's just this. That's all there is. And, there's careers and jobs and all of that is important. But the Zazen itself will help you clarify. Yeah, it helps clarify what you really need to do with your life. That's how I'd put it. It can
Clarity
help.
is huge. A lot of people go
Clarity
through
is
life
huge.
without clarity.
Right.
I mean, I can relate to going through life, and sometimes you're raised a certain way where you put others' needs ahead of your own, or you don't take the time to check in and think like, what is it that I want out of life, or what is it, what's important to me, and so that clarity, dedicating time to yourself, and so sitting is carving out time to just quiet the mind, and through that, certainly clarity will inevitably come. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I was really struck last time I spoke to my teacher Roshi. He just said it offhandedly, but he's like, he sits an hour, at least an hour every day in the morning, and he's like, that's non-negotiable. Non-negotiable. Like, he gets up in the morning and he does it because he needs to do that. Need sounds like kind of like a dependency, but it's not. It's just I need to do this practice for the rest of my life. I mean, who knows? I might drop out someday. I suspect highly that I won't. Not at this stage. Again, it's going back to priesthood and a lifetime commitment. But yeah, it all comes down to, yeah, clarifying, like you said, clarifying your mind, and you realize as time goes on what you really need to do with your life, what your purpose is, what your calling may be. There's this great science writer. His name is Ed Young. I really like what he had to say. He's really into birding now. He moved to Oakland, and I guess he's in a wooded area, and he's really gotten into birding. That's what he describes it as, becoming more whole as a result of like paying attention to the natural world, especially through birding. And that helps him navigate this world that we're in right now, this kind of like where it seems like just everything is falling apart in this world. And people might think that him going out birding might be a trivial thing, but it's not. It allows them to become more whole as a result of it, kind of like what meditation does. But for Zazen, I would argue, is much, much deeper. He says he can't meditate. So in a way, his meditation is birding, but it does make him more whole and to become more kind of connected to his community.
This podcast is all about growing up. Everyone has their own growing up story. You've shared a little bit of yours. When I say growing up, like, what does that mean to you to grow up?
I think it just means owning your own shit and not becoming a more responsive, emotionally stable, centered person. I mean, I did bring up therapy earlier, and Zen can certainly help with that. But just, yeah, it comes back to realizing how not to cause yourself the least amount of harm to yourself and to others. It really comes down to that.
For those who are listening, curious about taking a first step towards Zen practice, what would that first step look like? Any suggestions for them?
Obviously, I'll say the Rochester Zen Center, come to a workshop here, but there's the Montreal Zen Center, and there's also the Toronto Zen Center, which I ended up staying there for a while because I was having problems with my green card. It was coming through and I had to go back to Canada. So I stayed at the Toronto Zen Center. So yeah, I'll just mention those three places because they're within our lineage. So just go to a workshop on Zen and see where that takes you if you're interested.
Great. I can link down to the description of the episode to those different centers. And if someone didn't necessarily want to go to a center, if they just wanted to try a practice, like you said, start with 5 minutes, start with 10 minutes, like really quickly, could you just kind of walk through what the steps would be if someone said, okay, tomorrow I'm going to do a 5-minute first meditation? What should they do?
Yeah, okay. So, you could even just sit in a chair. I mean, we sit in these, I'll just mention 3 pillars of Zen because they actually have images too on how we sit. So that can really help. Let's just use sitting in a chair. So sitting in a chair, your hips are I actually measured it out. Your hips are 3 feet away from the wall. So find a kind of a blank surface. And then we have this hand posture. You can try that, or like this too. I sometimes do this, but yeah, just have your hands on your lap. You want to have a straight back, but you also want your spine, the natural curvature in your spine. And basically, you want to have your chin tucked in and your eyes open, for sure, half open. And just like put all of your attention on the counting the inhalations and exhalations. Don't try and control the breathing. Just breathe naturally through the nose. If you can, inhale and exhale through the nose. We keep our mouth closed. And just when you're inhaling, just go 1, exhaling 2, 3, 4. So you're not vocalizing, and I'm just doing it to explain, but you're just doing it on your mind, and just put all of your energy and attention, that's the key, attention, on the counting. And if you make it to 10, in other words, you don't get distracted with thoughts and you lose track of the counting. If you make it to 10, then you go back to 1. And if you lose the counting and you're trying to figure out, where did I stop counting? Don't worry about it. Just go right back to 1. Just bring it back to 1. So that's a preliminary practice. And there are others after, but that's good way to start.
Okay. Well, I think that's really clear. I could put those steps in the description as well if anyone wants to. It's pretty simple, but yeah, I'll put them down there too.
And just to mention, because you mentioned 2 books, so kind of like the 2 classics was the 3 Pillars of Zen from Rochester Zen Center, but then the other one you mentioned was Shiniru Suzuki's book called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. That's kind of like, that's a classic book. It's from the San Francisco Zen Center. Yeah, those are kind of like my experience with people is those are the 2 books that they've read that kind of got them to start practicing. I mean, there are a lot of ones too, but.
Yeah, we'll link down to the books too. I hope this will pique some curiosity for listeners, or maybe help some listeners who are already practicing to want to commit and deepen their practice. I really enjoyed the conversation, Trueman. I really thank you for taking the time to be with us today. It was really a pleasure to hear your story.
Yeah, that's great connecting with you again.
Well, that's a wrap on this episode of the After Peter Pan podcast. If you found it insightful, please drop us a rating or give us a like. It really helps to widen our audience. Thank you again for tuning in. Bye-bye.